Christmas shadows. The wind bit sharply against the narrow streets of Guangzhou, carrying the scent of snow and faint incense from a nearby temple. Liang Mei pulled her thin coat tighter around herself as she clutched the small bundle of food she had managed to scrape together for her children. Her apartment, tucked in a crowded lane, seemed colder than the winter outside. She had counted on this Christmas evening being special, but as the clock edged closer to 6, the grim reality settled in. The triplets would go hungry. Li Wei, the eldest by minutes, but the most protective, peeked through the frosted window, his small fingers leaving streaks against the glass. Li Jie and Li Jun hovered close, their identical faces mirroring worry and disappointment. The three children had asked about Christmas gifts with innocent excitement earlier that day, and Liang Mei had forced a smile she did not feel. "Maybe next year," she whispered, though even she knew it would be unlikely. Inside her heart, a storm raged. She had hoped Xiao Chun, her lover for months, would come through with promises of help. A kind word, a warm meal, even a simple gift. But he had vanished yet again, caught up in his own world. Each unkept promise was a sharp reminder of her predicament. She was alone in providing for the three children who depended on her entirely. The thought of confronting them with nothing filled her with a hollow despair. The apartment smelled faintly of oil and cold cement. The small table bore the remnants of a meager lunch, a half-empty rice bowl, a single wilted vegetable, and a cracked mug of tea. Liang Mei set the bundle on the floor and knelt beside her children. Her voice, though soft, trembled with urgency. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know it's not much." The children exchanged glances, and for a moment, silence stretched between them, a silence heavy with understanding beyond their years. Li Wei finally spoke, his voice small but firm. "We'll be okay, Mama. We always are." Even in her grief, Liang Mei felt a spark of pride. Her children were resilient, though she feared resilience alone could not fill their empty stomachs. As she hugged them close, her mind wandered to the moments that had led her here. The secret meetings with Xiao Chun, the whispered promises in dimly lit alleys, the thrill of feeling desire despite the endless pressures of motherhood. Those fleeting hours had felt like escape, a reminder that she was more than the sum of her struggles. But now, that escape seemed hollow, leaving only the weight of responsibility and the sting of betrayal. Outside, the streets echoed with laughter and the faint clatter of holiday preparations. Neighbors hung bright lights, and the air carried the promise of celebration. But for Liang Mei and her triplets, it was only a reminder of absence. She wanted to shield them, to create an illusion of warmth and cheer. Yet she had no strength left to conjure lies. The children busied themselves with their own imaginative play, pretending the tattered blanket was a festive tablecloth and the few scraps of bread their feast. Liang Mei watched, heart aching, and made a silent vow. Somehow, this night would not be wasted. She could not change the past, nor could she rely on Xiao Chun to deliver what he had promised. Perhaps help would come from somewhere unexpected, someone outside the confines of broken promises. A faint noise at the door drew her attention, a distant knock, almost lost among the gusts of winter wind. She paused, unsure if it was a neighbor, a courier, or merely a wandering sound. The triplets looked up, sensing her hesitation. "Who is it, Mama?" Li Jie asked. Liang Mei shook her head, forcing a calm she did not feel. "I don't know, darling. Perhaps someone who lost their way." The knock came again, louder this time, insistent. Liang Mei's pulse quickened. In that moment, the weight of failure, the sting of betrayal, and the chill of the apartment seemed to converge. She glanced at her children, their eyes wide with cautious hope, and made a decision. If a stranger had come to their door, maybe, just maybe, Christmas was not entirely lost. The door creaked open, and the wind swept into the room, carrying with it the faint aroma of wood smoke and pine. Standing there was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with an aura of calm that seemed almost deliberate. He held a small bundle in his hands, a simple gesture that immediately put the children at ease. "Hello," he said, voice warm, gentle. "I think you might need this tonight." Liang Mei hesitated, eyes flicking from the stranger to her children. The triplets edged closer, curiosity overcoming caution. For the first time that evening, a spark of something she had not felt in months, a cautious hope, flared within her. Perhaps, she thought, salvation did not always arrive as expected. Perhaps Christmas could still be something more than emptiness. And with that thought, the room, cold and shadowed moments ago, felt the first hint of warmth. A stranger's hearth. The knock had barely faded when Daniel Harper stepped fully into the narrow apartment, setting the small bundle on the floor with deliberate care. The triplets clustered around it instantly, eyes wide with curiosity and relief. The faint aroma of bread and roasted meat escaped the simple package, and for the first time that evening, Liang Mei saw genuine smiles flicker across their faces. Daniel's presence was calm, yet commanding. His coat, dusted with snow, suggested a journey from a distant, colder place, and his hands bore the faint calluses of someone accustomed to labor. There was no rush, no judgment, only an unspoken understanding that the family needed help, and he had come to provide it. He crouched slightly to meet the children at their level. Though the faceless camera would capture only the movement, the gentle tilt of his head, and the warmth of his gestures. "Here," he said, extending the bundle. "Eat first. Warm yourselves. Everything else can wait." Li Wei hesitated, glancing at his mother for permission. Liang Mei nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Her children tore into the modest meal with an enthusiasm that stung her with guilt and relief at once. Li Jiao laughed when a crumb fell on Li Jun's cheek, and Li Jun retaliated with a playful shove that sent both children tumbling onto the threadbare rug. Liang Mei's eyes followed their movements, and for a fleeting moment, the weight pressing on her chest lifted. Daniel watched quietly, sipping a flask of warm tea he had carried in from the cold. He offered Liang Mei a small nod, a gesture of reassurance that needed no words. The silence between them carried a subtle tension. His curiosity about her struggles, her apprehension about accepting help, and the unspoken knowledge that she had been abandoned by those who should have cared. Xiao Qian's absence hung over the room like a shadow, and Liang Mei's chest tightened at the memory of broken promises. The triplets' energy began to transform the space. Their laughter echoed against the cold walls, bouncing off the ceiling in a rhythm that made the apartment feel less like a prison and more like a home, even if temporary. Li Wei, still cautious, finally asked, "Who are you? Why are you helping us?" Daniel crouched again, keeping his face just out of view for the faceless narrative, and placed a hand on Li Wei's shoulder, a gentle anchor. "I've been where you are," he said simply. "Sometimes the world forgets you. Sometimes you need a stranger to remind you that you're not alone." Liang Mei's throat tightened. His words, unassuming and simple, pierced through her defenses. She had been so wrapped up in fear and shame that she hadn't considered that someone outside her immediate world could care for her family without expecting anything in return. Her mind briefly flashed to Xiao Qian, his charm, his promises, and his eventual disappearance. The contrast was stark and uncomfortable, yet illuminating. As the children ate, Daniel moved quietly around the apartment, adjusting the blanket on the floor, stacking the small chairs closer together, and even finding a few old candles that still had life left in them. Each gesture, small yet deliberate, reflected a careful thoughtfulness, a stark contrast to the empty gestures of the man Liang Mei had trusted before. Liang Mei felt herself watching him more than the children. There was no judgment in his eyes, no expectation of repayment. He seemed content simply to see her children fed and warm. For the first time in months, she allowed herself a deep exhale. Perhaps trust could be rebuilt, though not with the man who had betrayed her, but with someone new, someone who saw her family as they were, and not as convenient extensions of his ego. Outside, the wind continued to howl, rattling the old window panes. Inside, warmth and light had begun to push back against the cold. The children, cheeks flushed with excitement and full bellies, began crafting a small Christmas game out of a broken wooden train set, their chatter filling the apartment. Liang Mei allowed herself a tentative smile, feeling the edges of hope sharpen into something tangible. Daniel noticed her gaze, offering a quiet, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a promise of romance, yet, but a recognition of shared humanity. Liang Mei, in turn, felt the first flicker of trust toward a stranger in a long time. The past could not be changed, and Xiao Qin's shadow lingered. But for tonight, there was warmth, laughter, and food, simple things that had eluded her for so long. As the night deepened, the apartment, once oppressive with cold and despair, had become a place of quiet refuge. Liang Mei tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, watching her children play. Daniel sat nearby, hands resting on his knees, observing them without interruption. The world outside remained harsh and indifferent, but within these four walls, a fragile sense of security had taken root. The chapter closes with the triplets curled up in the warmth of their temporary sanctuary. Liang Mei standing by the window with a cautious hope in her heart, and Daniel preparing to leave, but not before leaving behind an unspoken promise of safety and care. The air is tense yet comforting, hinting that tomorrow may bring more than mere survival. It could bring the possibility of change. Shadows of the past. The warmth of the evening felt fragile as Liang Mei watched her children play, their laughter filling the small apartment with light she had long thought impossible. Yet, just as the fire in the hearth flickered against the walls, a familiar tension prickled the air. A sharp knock at the door shattered the fragile calm, echoing ominously through the narrow space. Li Wei froze mid-laugh, glancing at his mother. Li Jie and Li Jun fell silent, sensing unease. Liang Mei's chest tightened. That knock carried a memory she had tried to suppress. Promises broken, whispers in dim alleys, and the face she had trusted in secret. Xiao Chun. Her hands trembled slightly as she moved toward the door. Daniel, seated nearby, observed the subtle shift in her posture. His instincts whispered caution, though he remained still, letting Liang Mei face the intrusion on her own terms. The children huddled close, sensing the tension without knowing why. When she opened the door, Xiao Qin stood there, his coat dusted with snow as if he had followed her from some distant place. His eyes held the same charm they always had, the kind that once made her heart quicken, yet now it felt hollow, manipulative. He smiled faintly, placing a small wrapped box in his hands. "Thought you might need this," he said smoothly, though his words carried an undertone of expectation. Liang Mei's lips pressed into a thin line. "Why are you here?" she asked, voice steady despite the churn in her stomach. "You promised you'd." "I know what I promised," he interrupted, his tone casual yet sharp. "But things come up. Responsibilities. Work. Life doesn't wait." The triplets peeked from behind her legs, curiosity laced with fear. Li Wei's eyes were wide, and Li Jie whispered, "Mama, who is he?" "He's someone who used to care." Liang Mei muttered under her breath, more to herself than to the children. The bundle in his hands now seemed trivial, almost mocking, against the weight of his betrayal. Daniel's presence became more pronounced, though faceless. He rose slowly, shoulders squared, hands relaxed but ready, a silent shield. He did not speak, but every movement communicated strength and calm, a counterpoint to Xiao Qin's unsettling charm. Liang Mei felt the contrast immediately. One man brought chaos, the other stability. One offered empty promises, the other quiet, consistent care. Xiao Qin's eyes flicked toward Daniel, curiosity and a hint of annoyance crossing his features. "And who is this?" he asked. "A friend," Liang Mei replied firmly, stepping slightly in front of her children. "Someone who actually helps instead of leaving when things get hard." Her words were not loud, yet they carried the weight of finality. Xiao Qin's lips twitched, and for a moment, she saw the mask of charm falter. He handed her the small box anyway, a hollow gesture that felt more like obligation than generosity. Li Wei, unable to contain himself, stepped forward, holding the small package Daniel had given earlier. "We don't need this," he said quietly. "We're happy now." His words, simple yet honest, carried a power that Liang Mei felt deep in her chest. She had never realized that children could understand so clearly the difference between emptiness and care. Xiao Qin's expression hardened. "You've changed," he said, voice low, almost a threat. "I don't like it." Liang Mei swallowed her fear. "No, I haven't changed. I've just realized who matters." Her eyes flicked to Daniel, then to her children. "And that's us. Together. Not what you pretend to give and then take away." The tension crackled in the room like static electricity. Xiao Qin's gaze lingered on the children for a long moment, perhaps measuring the loyalty that had formed between them and Daniel. Finally, he turned, tossing the small box onto the floor with a clatter that made the triplets jump. Without another word, he disappeared into the snow-dusted street, leaving a trail of cold wind and lingering resentment behind. Liang Mei closed the door slowly, leaning against it as relief and exhaustion mingled. Her hands rested on the children's shoulders, feeling the warmth of their small bodies against her. "It's okay," she whispered. "He's gone. We're safe." Daniel returned to his seat nearby, letting the silence speak for him. No words were needed. His presence alone was reassurance enough. The children resumed their play, cautiously at first, then with increasing laughter and energy. Liang Mei's heart, still tense from confrontation, allowed itself a fragile sense of peace. The shadows of betrayal had passed, at least for now. As the night deepened, Liang Mei reflected on the choices she had made, the mistakes that had led to this precarious moment, and the unexpected kindness of a man who had no reason to care yet did. The contrast between Xiao Qin's selfish charm and Daniel's quiet dedication illuminated a truth she could no longer ignore. Love and loyalty were demonstrated through action, not empty words. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a breath she didn't have to force. The past could not be changed, but the future, fragile as it was, held promise. Tomorrow might still bring challenges, but for tonight, her children were safe, warm, and happy. And that, she realized, was more than she had dared to hope for. Christmas dawn. Morning light filtered softly through the frosted window panes, scattering pale streaks across the apartment. The wind still whispered against the walls, but inside, warmth lingered, a tangible comfort that had been absent for so long. Liang Mei stirred first, careful not to wake her children. She inhaled the scent of bread and cinnamon lingering from last night, remnants of Daniel's quiet generosity. The simple warmth reminded her that kindness could arrive unexpectedly, and for a moment, she allowed herself to feel hope. Li Wei, Li Jie, and Li Jun soon emerged from their shared blanket fort, eyes bright and cheeks flushed. Their laughter filled the apartment, bouncing off the walls and chasing away the final traces of the cold and despair that had haunted them. They noticed the small presents Daniel had left in a neat pile, a modest train set, a few books, and handcrafted wooden figures. The children's delight was uncontainable, and even Liang Mei allowed herself a smile that reached her eyes for the first time in weeks. Daniel remained at the doorway, hands in his pockets, observing quietly. His presence was steady, reassuring, faceless yet expressive through the subtle sway of his stance and the warmth in his movements. Liang Mei met his gaze briefly, gratitude and unspoken understanding passing between them. There was no rush for declarations, no need for words to define what had begun in shared kindness and mutual care. Tonight, action had spoken louder than sentiment. The triplets, unaware of the complexities of adult relationships, busied themselves with the new toys, chattering excitedly and inventing elaborate stories around the wooden figures. Their voices created a melody that seemed to cleanse the room of lingering tension. Liang Mei watched them, heart swelling with a mixture of relief, love, and cautious optimism. The fear of hunger, neglect, and betrayal had been replaced, for now, with laughter and warmth. Liang Mei allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. The past weeks had been painful, a tangle of mistakes, secrecy, and broken promises. Xiao Qin's absence had been a void she could not ignore, yet the encounter the previous night had crystallized a hard truth. Those who abandon you are not the architects of your happiness. Care, consistency, and genuine concern were what built trust and nurture hearts. Daniel had demonstrated all three without expecting repayment or admiration, simply acting from decency. Her thoughts were interrupted as Li Wei approached, holding the wooden train tenderly. "Mama," he said, "we're really happy here." "Thank you." His voice carried both innocence and insight, acknowledging not just the gift, but the stability that Daniel's presence represented. Liang Mei bent down, hugging him close, then pulled the other two into the embrace. "I'm happy too," she whispered, feeling the weight of her guilt begin to lift. Outside, the first hints of sunrise painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. The snow reflected the colors, turning the city into a quiet, glistening canvas. Liang Mei glanced at the window, then at Daniel, who had quietly stepped outside for a moment, hands brushing the railing as he looked at the horizon. She sensed a subtle shift, a possibility that life could be gentler than she had feared, that the future might hold more than survival. She returned to her children, helping them arrange the little presents in a playful display. Every laugh, every excited squeal, reminded her of the importance of nurturing love and care over empty promises. Daniel returned silently, joining them at the edge of the room. He said nothing, but his presence alone anchored the fragile peace that had settled over the family. The moment required no words. The warmth, laughter, and shared space were enough to convey connection, trust, and an unspoken bond forming. Liang Mei allowed herself a final glance at the apartment, at the soft flicker of light across the walls, at the triplets playing without worry, and at Daniel, who stood just far enough to respect boundaries, yet near enough to offer support. She realized that Christmas had not been about gifts or grand gestures. It had been about safety, kindness, and the quiet presence of those who truly care. As the children ran toward her with arms outstretched, calling her to join their game, Liang Mei stepped into their circle. For the first time in months, her heart was unburdened, light with gratitude, love, and cautious hope. Daniel's eyes met hers briefly, acknowledging the unspoken understanding between them. Trust had been rebuilt, loyalty had been demonstrated, and the past shadows no longer held dominion over the present. The chapter, and the story, concludes with the apartment filled with laughter, warmth, and the soft, golden glow of morning. Outside, the city remains indifferent, snow still falling. Yet inside, a family has found solace. Liang Mei's heart, once heavy with guilt and fear, feels a quiet optimism. The past has been confronted, betrayal recognized, and kindness embraced. The future, while uncertain, is bright with possibility, anchored by love, care, and the subtle promise of new beginnings.